From being raised by monkeys in the jungles of Uganda to growing up with a pack of wolves since birth, this is the story of 5 feral children raised by animals. John Sabonia was only 3 years old when his mother was murdered by his father, and he fled into the deep jungles of Uganda. After a few days of being all alone in that scary jungle, John was approached by a group of vervet monkeys. Hesitant at first, they slowly offered him food like sweet potatoes and nuts. The monkeys continued to be cautious for 2 long weeks after that, up until they decided John was not a threat. So they took him in as one of their own, teaching him how to climb trees and find food for himself. Many years passed and John had now been fully immersed in the wildlife, pretty much becoming one of them. However, one day a woman by the name of Millie was out looking for firewood and happened to come across a small pack of monkeys. She noticed there was something odd about one of them as it had no tail. Much to her surprise, Millie realized this was actually a small boy. At the time he looked like a little monster, but most noticeably, his attitude was wild as he had adopted the animal's behavior. With the assistance of other people, John was separated from the monkeys and brought back to civilization. He went through an extensive rehab process and is now functioning in society, even taking part in the Special Olympics. But while John is now doing well in our society, the same can't be said about the 2 sisters who were raised by a she-wolf. In the 1920s, 2 sisters from India were found in a forest living with a pack of wolves. They were just little children at the time, both of which ran on all fours. They only ate raw meat, drank liquids by licking it up with their tongues, and the 2 would never sleep after midnight. Instead, they would howl at the moon. The sisters were discovered by Reverend Singh, who made a careful plan to capture them and bring them back to society. Singh and a group of men entered the den where the wolves were living, and right away the she-wolf appeared, giving the group a vicious snarl. However, its fate was sealed as the men sent out a barrage of arrows to get rid of the threat. And just like that, the 2 were taken into an orphanage. Unfortunately though, they didn't seem to adjust well to their new life, as the younger of the siblings, Amala, died just 1 year after being rescued, and the older sister, Kamala, died a few years after that. However, just like Amala and Kamala, Vanya Yodin was raised by animals as well, due to not being wanted by his mother. Vanya lived with his abusive mom who treated him like a pet rather than her son. One day, he was discovered by Russian care workers and what they found shocked them to the core. The little boy was forced into a small room, all alone, surrounded by nothing but a ton of birds, cages, bird food, and bird droppings. It turns out Vanya had been living with these creatures for 7 long years. He was pretty much raised by the birds and could only communicate with them and them only. It was said that when the caretakers tried talking to him, Vanya only chirped in response and flapped his arms like wings. Though his mother fed him regularly and didn't beat him, she never made an effort to talk to him. Once Vanya was found, he was taken to an asylum and then later transferred into a rehab center. As for his mother, well, she pretty much got rid of all responsibilities for him as she signed a document releasing Vanya into the care of the workers immediately. However, Vanya wasn't the only feral boy in Russia, as Ivan Mishakov was raised by a pack of dogs. Ivan was abandoned by his abusive parents when he was only 4 years old and ended up running away from his foster home not too long after that. He was homeless and alone in the streets of Moscow until he came across a pack of dogs. The dogs took him in and treated Ivan as one of their own. He spent 2 years living with them, learning from them. He could only communicate by barking and growling. Ivan and the dogs grew a special bond together, and he eventually became the pack leader. During the days they would scavenge for food together, either from the streets or going to the local bakery and begging for anything they could get. But after a couple of years, a policeman discovered him and tried separating Ivan from the dogs. However, the dogs weren't gonna give up the boy that easily. Anytime they would get close to the boy, the pack would surround him and not let anyone come too close. It took 3 attempts to snag Ivan away from the pack, and once they did, they brought him into an orphanage and the dogs were put down. Despite all of that, Ivan is thankful he was rescued and brought back to society, because now he speaks 2 languages and even earns a living working in a factory. However, as wild as these stories were, the craziest comes from Hadara, who was actually raised by ostriches for 10 years. Hadara was separated from his parents in the Sahara Desert when he was only 2 years old, and though 99.9% of us would surely end up dying in that unforgiving terrain, miraculously, he survived. This was all thanks to a group of ostriches who found him and took him in as one of their own. The little boy lived with the group and grew up with them until he was 12 years old. By then, he was finally found and rescued. Though it took some time to reaccustom him to modern society, Hadara ended up just fine, getting married and even having children.